It gives me great pleasure to introduce Alice Hoffman and her book, When We Flew Away. The story begins before Anne Frank's diary and before she and her family were forced into hiding. This is the story behind the story. It's Alice Hoffman's in deep research where we learn about Anne, an ordinary schoolgirl with a love for life. Many of you know the diary of Anne Frank. What you will learn from Alice's book will give you insight into the beginning of Anne Frank's story. And if you don't mind, I want to quote Ronald Leopold, who is the director of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. This quote really spoke to me. He said, "We highly recommend Alice's novel of Anne Frank's life. We hope it will persuade readers that contributing to a better world is both necessary and possible." And I think that's a great quote. Alice will be joined in conversation with author Sara DiVello, whose book, Broadway Butterfly, one of my favorites, was the CBS New York Book Club pick. She's also the founder and host of Mystery and Thriller Mavens, and she's the co-chair of this fabulous festival this year. So, please give a warm welcome.
Thank you to my incredible honorary co-chair, Jill Karp, who I just love so much. And I am so excited to host the incredible Alice Hoffman. So if you're unfamiliar, Alice is the author of more than 30 works of fiction, including When We Flew Away, which we will be discussing today, The Invisible Hour, The Museum of Extraordinary Things, The Dove Keepers, Practical Magic, The Red Garden, and the Oprah's Book Club selection here on Earth. She holds a BA from Adelphi University and received the Morellis Fellowship to the Stanford University Creative Writing Center, where she earned an MA in creative writing. She also holds an MA from the Harvard Divinity School and is currently a fellow at the Harvard Divinity School. So how perfect that we're holding this in a church. Reverend Hoffman will be leading services later today. Alice, let's jump right in. So first of all, I just want to tell everybody, you're all buying the book today, okay? Get that in your heads. It's happening. Father's Day is this weekend. If you forgot Mother's Day, your best friend's birthday, your birthday, treat yourself. Everyone, signed books make the very best gifts. So let's support this author and support our incredible woman-owned independent bookstore by voting with our wallets and buying books. But I want to give you the story behind the story. I want to give you what you're not going to get on the page, the real juicy stuff, the inside scoop. So Alice, you share in your afterword that the diary of Anne Frank had a profound effect on your life as a young writer and a young woman. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it really affected me hugely. But I just want to say, Sara, thank you so much for doing this. We're friends, so I feel comfortable with you. And thank you all for being here today. And I feel like this festival is always great every year, but for me, this has been the best year ever. The writers have been amazing. So thank you so much.
That's high praise from Alice Hoffman.
Yeah, I didn't even realize, because I don't really remember the things I've written about, but I was so affected by Anne Frank. I've written about her in 2 other books that I forgot about. One in a book called Survival Lessons about surviving cancer, and one in a book that's kind of my favorite novel. I think it's because it's partially about a girl who falls in love with Anne Frank, and it's called The Third Angel, and this girl loses her mother, and all she can do is read the diary over and over again because she needs to read something that will make her feel like there's still joy in the world. And so I'll just read you a little bit about...
Please.
I can't see with or without my glasses, so I'll just take them off. This is how it happened for me. In the year when I was 12, I discovered many of the books that have meant the most to me, books that changed my life. And this is true for many of us. At 12, we're becoming the adult readers that will be one day, and hopefully it's a time when we have the freedom to walk into a library or a bookstore and choose any book we wish to read. We can experiment with books and find the voices that speak to us and see life all around us as something brand new. And the book that affected me more than any other was The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. It changed the way I looked at the world, and it changed the person I was and the person I was to become. I read the diary in 1964. It was only 20 years after Anne Frank was murdered by the Nazis at Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and yet I had heard very little about the Holocaust. I think the same thing is happening today, actually. That's one of the reasons that I wrote the book. It actually wasn't my idea. It was the idea of an editor at Scholastic in London. And the reason she had this idea is because she felt she was seeing so much more anti-Semitism in England. And also that kids were not reading the diary and they didn't even know who Anne Frank was. She actually went to the Anne Frank house to ask them if it would be possible for her to find a writer to write a prequel to the diary. And they agreed, and then she came to me. And I said yes without thinking. I didn't think about, what a huge, I knew it was a huge honor, but also what, in a way, it was a burden because I had to get it right, because it was Anne Frank. But I also thought it was the book that my grandmother would have most wanted me to write. So I said yes, and then I started researching. But I think I just want to read a little bit more from this intro. There are many reasons The Diary of a Young Girl is a classic and why Anne has become the voice of the Holocaust. Other families went into hiding, other people met with horrible, unfair fates, and other people wrote diaries documenting their experiences. Yet Anne's diary stands out, not just as a humanitarian document that reminds the world of what happened to the Jews and warns us about the rise of anti-Semitism and the importance of attending to the needs of refugees, but also because it transcended its form to become true literature. It's Anne's singular voice, funny and annoying and brilliant, which allows readers to feel that they know her. It's a voice so personal that when we read her diary, we become Anne. And through her, we experience a life that we have never led. The book is a warning and a blessing. What happened once can happen again. I'm afraid it might be happening again. Evil does walk through the world, and it is often undetected until it's too late, as it was in the Netherlands and throughout Europe. As Anne writes her letters in the diary to Kitty, her imaginary friend, we, the reader, become that friend, and we're the person that she's confiding in. We're the ones that learn lessons about love and remembrance. No one knows what Anne's thoughts were before she began writing her diary, and much of her life between the ages of 10 and 13 is invented in the pages of my novel, and the details of relationships are imagined. Writing historical fiction is much like writing a mystery. We must invent what we cannot know. We take pieces of history, and then we recreate the world.
Oh, Alice. I have goosebumps. That is so beautifully and heartfully said.
Well, every time I think about her, especially lately, I feel like I'm going to cry. So if I cry, excuse me.
I'm tearing up right now.
Yeah.
Everybody, Anne Frank's birthday was yesterday. She would have been 96. And she would have still been alive, I think. I play bridge at the senior center every Thursday, and many of my bridge friends are in their 90s. She could and should have still been with us. And so it feels extra profound and extra weighty to be having this conversation with you here today.
It's funny because until I went to Amsterdam, which I went with my friend Jill Karp, we had an amazing once-in-a-lifetime trip and met the most incredible people, including one of Anne's best friends from high school. And as you know how best friends from high school can be, she had a lot to say. Not all positive. But, I just felt like, it seemed so present to meet someone who was Anne's friend, who was still alive.
Who was still alive. So Alice, first of all, I always read the acknowledgments first. Is anyone else a dork who reads the acknowledgments first? Okay, thank you. I knew I wasn't alone. So I read the acknowledgments first, and I saw my incredible honorary co-chair and friend Jill Karp. And I was so delighted to know that she accompanied you on this research trip. And now, can you bring us all through your mind's eye to that research trip? What was it like? Tell us about that.
Well, I had been to the Anne Frank house many times, but we got to go kind of behind the scenes. I worked with 3 researchers there, so I felt that made me feel safe in that, if I made mistakes, they corrected me very quickly. So that was great, and I felt comfortable. And then we went with one of the researchers, and actually her daughter, to the house where the Franks had lived before they went into hiding. And we were actually asked if we wanted to stay there because they have writers who can't write in their own countries come and stay there. And I felt like I couldn't do that. Yeah. And actually even going into the house was so emotional. Going through her room, going up to the rooftop where there were very iconic photographs of Anne. One of them is her reading, which she did all the time, up on the roof, and there we were on the roof. It's a good thing I didn't stay there because I broke the toilet immediately. But I just felt such a connection with her. And the interesting thing is, it's a nice neighborhood, and it was a nice neighborhood when she lived there. It was a neighborhood of refugees. And while we were there, we could hear the kids playing in the park, the same park that she played in. We walked past the bookstore where she had seen the diary and then asked for it as a birthday present from her father. And it just didn't feel very far away.
So in the pages of this book, we go with Anne and her beautiful and good sister, Margot, to that bookstore and to the ice cream parlor and up on the roof, and we stand at the window and we look out at that square. And Jill, when I asked her about what it was like for her to go with you, had described watching you stand there and look out at that square. And she said, I knew that Alice was seeing it in a different way that I was because she was imagining what she would write. Bring us into that moment.
Well, it was hard for me because the first thing I thought is I cannot write this in first person because Anne's diary, I think, is the most brilliant first person voice in all of literature. So I knew I couldn't write it in first person, but I wanted to be close to her. So, and I also knew that the way I was writing, I didn't know what happened next. So I didn't reread the diary until afterwards. I did a lot of research, but I didn't reread her words. I did read some of her stories that I hadn't read before. And what was interesting to me is I felt very much, and I think especially kids reading the book feel like they are her. They're experiencing and that's what literature does. It teaches you empathy. You become someone else. And when I found out that a lot of her friends found her to be annoying, which I think mine found me to be, I felt closer to her. Everything I found out about her made me feel closer to her. Also that she loved fairy tales, and she shared that with her father. And that was something that was very special, their relationship about literature, and that she wrote fairy tales. That also made me feel much closer to her. And so it allowed me to feel like I could begin to tell her story.
Because you use fairy tales as a device, as a tool in the book to herald the approaching of evil. Tell us about that creative choice and how you did that.
Thank you. I think what happened was so horrible that it seems unreal. I think some of us are experiencing that right now, like we can't believe what's happening is real, and that was happening there. And so how do I tell this story? Especially, it's a book for children, but I really wrote it for adults, but I wrote it for myself in a way. But I thought, how does a child reader or a teen reader begin to understand how deeply evil things can become? And I thought the only way I could really do it is in a fairy tale. Because fairy tales, one of the reasons I think I love them so much, they have a way of dealing with evil. And some people say, don't let children under a certain age, like the age of 8, read fairy tales, because they're really, really brutal. And they tell you the truth. So it was a way, for me, it was a way into the story.
It was such a clever and poetic and deeply interesting creative choice. And I loved how you used the black moths and seeing those shadows and that darkness approaching.
It's funny, the black moths, it's funny what kind of comes to you as a writer, but I went away with my other friend Claudia, who's here today, and we were staying someplace, and there was a gigantic black moth on my door. And so I went to the desk. It was kind of a hotel rooms, I don't know, and I went and I said, what is this black moth? And they told me the name. I don't remember the name, but she said, it's an harbinger of death. And I thought, oh, great. That's good to hear. And I just thought, there are things in nature that can mean many things to many people.
Yeah.
And I feel like when she started to see these black moths, more and more of them all the time, it was kind of the symbol of evil for what was happening in the world. And I think, when people say, so, you're starting the book, she's only like 10 years old, 9 years old. What could be interesting about a 9-year-old's life? Lot. Yeah.
Wait, Alice, did you check out of the hotel? or did you have the courage to stay? Because I wouldn't.
No, I stayed, and I really felt, I like that moth. I don't know, I felt a kinship with that moth.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So it feels, in addition to Anne Frank's birthday being yesterday, her 96th birthday, as I was researching this, I was a European history minor. I took 2 classes on the Holocaust, and I have been distressed to see statistics like, as of 2020, 54% of Americans under the age of 40 believe that the Holocaust was a myth. 54%, that's more than half of Americans under the age of 40 believe that the Holocaust was a myth. And Anne and the Frank family fled Germany and went to the Netherlands, which was accepting refugees. And 59% of residents of the Netherlands under the age of 40 believe that the Holocaust was a myth. The place where Anne Frank took shelter because she fled her native Germany because she was being persecuted for being a Jew.
Well, what's interesting about that is that's why Scholastic, my publisher, and the Anne Frank House wanted this book to be written, so that kids would read it and grown-ups would read it, and then they would want to read the diary afterwards. They would put this down and want to read the diary. And, it's interesting because one time I went to Amsterdam because I wrote a book, a different book about the Holocaust, and I had a meeting with like 10 older women who were survivors. And they really surprised me because they were very much against the Anne Frank House. The reason was because they said it's the way that the Dutch can feel better about themselves. But it is a way. It's a way of claiming what they did. And actually, there were more Jews statistically who were transported to concentration camps and murdered from the Netherlands than from any other country, including Germany and Austria. And part of the reason is that people followed the rules. And I am a big believer in not following the rules. And, right? And people, when they were told to sign up and give their addresses and the names and ages of all their children, they did. They stood in line. They did all of the right things, and that was one of the reasons that happened.
I actually didn't know that statistic until I got to the end of your book. Because the Netherlands is so small, I had assumed wrongly that the largest population of Jewish people who were deported and held captive would be from Germany or possibly Poland. And so when I saw that statistic in the end of your book, and thank you for that information, I was shocked.
Yeah, I think it's pretty shocking. If I could just read a little
Please.
bit. I mean, one of the things I did with this book, and part of it was to try to explain, especially to child and teen readers, how much you can lose and how fast it can happen. And one of the things that I'm hoping that the book does, it shows you how fascism can take hold so quickly, and everything was very slowly, and all of a sudden you're in a situation where you can't get out, and it's done. So if you don't mind, I'll just read a little piece of this.
To be able to hear Alice Hoffman read Alice Hoffman's book is such a special experience.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So at the end of every chapter or every section, I have a section called What We Lost. and it gets bigger and bigger, and there's more and more that's lost. So here's what we lost. Our houses, our savings, our businesses were all taken away. We could own nothing, only our personal property, clothes and furniture, spoons and forks. We could not enter museums or libraries or restaurants or theaters. We could not go to the zoo or any public building. Even markets that were not specifically meant for Jews, we could not go to them. Dogs were allowed to sit on park benches, but we were not. We were banned from cinemas and cafes. By the last day of May, we could no longer use swimming pools, parks, spas, or hotel. We could no longer own radios. There were signs that we didn't want to read, but they all said the same thing. Jews were not allowed. We could not go to their schools. Dutch children dressed in Nazi uniforms and marched through the streets. We gave our babies away so that they might have a chance to live. They came for us at any time. A knock on the door was all it took. There were not enough locks in the world to keep us safe. They said we were the problem. They said they had a solution. And that's when we knew the time had come. So it's scary to me that it feels similar, and that, one of the things that I didn't know when I started researching this book is how many refugees were not allowed into this country, and that many were sent back. There were boat full of refugees that were sent back, and everyone on the boat were then, once they were sent back, they were murdered. And in fact, Anne's father, Otto, was very friendly with, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his name.
Macy's.
He owned Macy's, yes. He owned Macy's, but I can't think of his name at the moment. Do you know who I'm talking about, anybody?
Yes.
Strauss. Thank you. And weirdly enough, I was writing this book in a place that I was renting from Strauss's great-nephew. And he introduced me to the Strauss, Joan Adler, who runs the Strauss Family Foundation, and she gave me some information that I don't think anybody had seen before. But Strauss really tried to get Otto and his family out of there. Otto had worked at Macy's. He'd come to New York, and Strauss knew Eleanor Roosevelt, and they still could not get him out. So that feeling of desperately wanting to leave a country and having no one be willing to accept you feels very current to me.
Absolutely. I also learned that in the back of your book, that Anne's relatives had fled to Massachusetts, actually, and they made it. And then by the time that Anne's father, Pim, and who believed deeply in the goodness of others and who thought they were safe in the Netherlands and kept telling his family and his children that they were safe, by the time he realized that they weren't, the U.S. was no longer accepting refugees, and that Eleanor Roosevelt had actually gone before Congress and asked to accept refugee children. They denied that. If they had accepted them, 26,000 children's lives would have been saved.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I wrote another book called The World That We Knew, and it was about France and about people in Germany who sent their children to France so they could survive. Actually, Jill and I went on that trip together too, and we met incredible survivors in France and in this country. And people sent their children away and never saw them again because the parents were murdered. And but they did it to try to rescue their children. And Otto Frank thought about sending his children to England, but thought it was better to keep the family together. It's just a gruesome decision to have to make.
And also the part in your book where you say, if Otto had stayed in the U.S., had kept working for Macy's, if he hadn't felt guilt-tripped by his mother.
Don't we all?
Hashtag relatable. To go back to Germany, how different this would have been, because he probably would have stayed here. And I mean, it would have been so different. And I think, I know I always think, what if, the road not taken, what if I had done this and not that, what if I had done this and not that, and then the domino effect of all of that. And so that was so painful. I actually stopped and reread that 3 times thinking how our world would be different.
So different. And I think for him and for so many people, it was so hard to really understand how evil could appear so suddenly and take over. I think, especially for, Otto, who was from Germany, they considered themselves Germans. They had fought in the First World War, and they weren't prepared for what was going to happen. And I don't know how you do prepare for things like that. So I think for now, it's a really important thing for us all to think about, and to have our children also think about and be aware of. And I know people want to protect children. That's why I think I was never really told about the Holocaust. I never even knew that my father had fought in France. People just did not want to talk about it. They just wanted to put it away. It was over.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about that in your afterword too. Shove it down, move on, don't talk about it. And it explains so much. And I think this book is so important for two reasons. Number one, because at a time when so many people are mistakenly under the belief that the Holocaust was a myth, it helps us to remember viscerally, and it tells us that story, and it brings us into this lovable, rebellious, wonderful, curious little girl that we all can relate to. And as you said earlier, reading cultivates empathy.
I think that was another thing that I really felt this kind of connection with Anne with, is that she was a big reader, and she was an escape. She wanted to escape into books. And I feel like, for big readers, that's a big part of it, is that you want to know what it's like to have another life, to feel what somebody else feels.
And I think I've been thinking about because when I read in your afterword how much you related to her and how much I related to her and how much so many of us related to her, and why is that? And it's because Anne often felt that she was different, that she didn't belong. It was not easy to be good like her good sister Margot, and how many of us are like that?
It's so interesting because, Margot was the perfect one, and who do we relate to? Much more Anne than to Margot, and I think, and I think she felt like she was different, and the dreams she had are dreams of like going to Hollywood and being a writer, meeting movie stars. There's dreams so many of us had when we were the same age.
Right. I didn't know she wanted to, she dreamed it, well, in your book, driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, going to Hollywood, being a journalist. She didn't know if she wanted to get married and have kids. She might have had this fabulous, journalistic, writerly, author life.
And I think when you think about her that way, it makes it come much more into the present. It wasn't a million years ago. It was very recent that all of these things happened.
She would be 96, and should still be with us.
I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting too is the family dynamics. Is that I think she had issues with her mother, and who doesn't, but she really did. And I think one of the things that really moved me is that there was an eyewitness account. They were sent to Bergen-Belsen very weeks before the war ended, and divided. So it was the mother and the two daughters, and then divided again, so that it was the two sisters. And even though they had, a rocky relationship, eyewitnesses said that they spent all of their time together and taking care of each other at the end. And so it's just really, when it comes down to it, it was really their family was so important, and they did everything they could to try to survive.
Yeah, and exactly. And her having this wonderful advocate and her dad. But exactly as you said, I think when you read, I read at the end that if she could have just held on for a few more weeks, of course she couldn't know this, but the Allied troops were so close to freeing the camps. And I actually was crying because I thought she was so close. I would give anything to have helped her to hold on just a few more weeks. And it's crushing that she didn't.
Yeah, I felt the same way. And I felt like, what her diary does to her life is that everything is so much more meaningful. And, I met with this woman from one of the universities there who was doing research on all the diaries written by teenagers in hiding. And there were a lot of them. And so it was just interesting to me that her diary, like I said in the foreword, really stands out because it becomes something more than just personal. It becomes universal, and she becomes the voice of the Holocaust. And I think it's so important that the Anne Frank House exists. It's the most attended tourist destination in Amsterdam, and it really matters, and it really keeps her alive.
So, Alice, what was the most surprising thing that you learned about Anne Frank?
Well, I think the most surprising thing, I think I mentioned it, was that, she wasn't so good. That she was difficult, that she talked back, that her sister went to a very difficult academic school, and Anne went to a Montessori school that actually we visited when we were there and saw where her desk had been. And, she was more artistic and got into trouble for talking and all the things, everything that made her more and more human to me.
So Anne loved bookstores, and Anne loved ice cream. So everyone, please today, go to a bookstore and get an ice cream cone and think about Anne Frank. Alice, as a prolific writer of more than 30 books that are so beloved by so many people, I am dying to know, what is your creative process like? What's it like to be in Alice Hoffman's creative brain? Do you write every day? Do you have a special routine? Do you have a special spot? Tell us everything.
When I started, I wrote every day. And I would get up. Well, I never thought I'd be a writer. Never, never. I mean, Anne Frank's diary was the first time that I thought maybe I could do it. Because when I was in school, we didn't read women at all. It was only men. And, the idea that like a young Jewish girl could write a book was flooring to me. So I think for me, I write for the same reasons that I've read. And writing has kind of taken over my reading, unfortunately. But I want to be someplace else. And I want to go somewhere else that I have some control of, and that's not here. So I felt like, maybe it's true that every writer has a very unhappy childhood, because I certainly did. And I spent, when I talk to like the girls I grew up with, they say, you were always going to the library. And that was my safe place, was going to the library. I thought I would be a librarian. That was really my goal. You too?
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah, and my elementary school librarian, Mrs. Incan, totally changed my life and let me spend all my free time in the library. So I'm a fan of librarians.
I am also a fan of librarians. Becky and Jill Supernaut, wave. Stand up, you Becky. Stand up, Becky. Our middle school librarian, my fellow board member, Jill Supernaut, our high school librarian. Librarians are heroes. They are doing that work of creating safe spaces for our children, for our young Alice Hoffmans and Sara DiVellos and everyone who's coming up now. And they're on the board of the Nantucket Book Foundation, helping us, all of us working toward this mission. But yes, libraries were my safe place, and I wanted to be a librarian.
Yeah, so I feel like for me it was total escape, and I found my way through life through books. I also, another writer that I really love that I feel like every 12-year-old should read is Ray Bradbury, who wrote Fahrenheit 451 about a society where they're burning books. And I just feel like it's such an important book. It really changed my life to read that book. So,
do the words come easily for you, Alice?
The first draft comes easier than the other drafts. I think it's gotten harder for me. I don't know. I think it's just gotten harder for me, but I think just because I'm more aware. I never thought I'd be read, so it's very easy to write something you think no one's ever going to read this, including my mother. So I think, when I started out, publishing was different, and I never thought I would make money or be published or any of that. I just wrote because I wanted to write, and there was nothing beyond that. And that's very freeing. And I think when you start writing young, it's that can happen to you. You just are free to tell whatever story you want to.
So when you're writing now, is it that you're thinking of all of us staring at you? You're picturing this audience thinking on your shoulder, or is it like a critical little editor saying, "Oh, that's a bad sentence"? Or
well, you know what? I had a really great thing happen to me when I was young, which sounds terrible, but it has to do with breaking the rules. And I was a bad student, but in third grade and then again in high school, I copied someone else's work to hand in. In third grade, it was my brother's work, and he was a genius, and he got an A, and I got a C. And then in high school, my friend, I knew she was brilliant. She got an A and I got a C. And that time I went up to the teacher and I said, I copied this work. Why did I get a C?
And what did they say?
They said, go to the principal's office. And then they called my mother in, who was a kind of a hippie, and they explained it to her, and she said, well, why did she get the C?
Right.
So I think that allowed me to understand that when you're getting a grade for something, it's not necessarily the work. And it allowed me not to take in criticism too much because I knew these other people were an A. I knew it was A work. So.
And that just goes to show you exactly how random reviews
random.
are. Oh my gosh.
It's random, and it was very freeing. I just felt it was freeing to me because I could write whatever I wanted.
Exactly. Well, with that, I want to open it up to the audience because we're here to have a conversation. We're here to create a community. So let's make this a conversation. Who has a question for Alice? In the back. Everybody else start thinking of your question. Make them good.
Hello, thank you for this wonderful talk. I have a question about Holocaust deniers and what is the reason behind it? About 20 years ago, I was in Prague and I met a chemistry professor who was retired, and he grew up during communism, and he would go to the university and talk about the terrible things that happened to him during communism. And he was so despondent. When I saw him later, he said, they don't believe me. They say it wasn't that bad. So my question to you is, what is the psychology behind denying the Holocaust? Is it because there's too much time that's passed between World War II and now, 80 years? I mean, I was at the anniversary of the invasion of Normandy last year, and it just felt like there was little connection in the people that were there that were younger to what happened, except for people who had been in places that had terrible Russian things happen, like the Czech Republic.
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm the one to explain the psychology of it, but all I can say is, as we're seeing right now, where facts are being erased, I think that happens over time, and depending on what regime is in charge, that history gets rewritten. So I think it's really important for all of us to be really aware of the true history of what happens.
Exactly. We live in a time where funding is being cut from libraries, where books by Maya Angelou and any Black author and any Holocaust book are being removed from the Naval Academy, but Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler gets to stay. That's the world we live in now. So what can each of us do to vote, to call, to donate, to speak out, to buy books, to share stories? What can each of us do to ensure that the history is preserved, the story is believed?
Sara, thank you for saying that, because I think that when I was doing the research for this book, I never really thought I'd be writing something that felt like it could happen again in this way. And now I do. My feelings about it have changed since I've written the book.
Yeah, it feels very different now. Reading it now feels very different. And I think, in the words of the great Elie Wiesel himself, a Holocaust survivor who wrote the book Night, which I have read 3 or 4 times, silence only benefits the oppressor. The time to be silent is not now, and it's uncomfortable to speak out, and it's hard to speak out, and we must speak out, because that is our moral and ethical responsibility. And so we do that with how we vote, the books we buy, the people we elect, the conversations we have, what we post on social media, the events that we attend. By being here today with your presence, with your voices, with your curiosity, with your readers' eyes and ears, this is a vote. Being here today is a vote. And we are creating a community, and together we are powerful, and we have to keep showing up and showing out, and that's how we do this. And you're doing it. And you have done this, Alice, with this book by bringing Anne Frank to a generation of readers who have not been personally affected by the Holocaust, who didn't have that empty chair at the dining room table, who didn't have that empty chair at the Passover Seder and said, Uncle Ed should be here and he isn't, or your grandfather should be here and he isn't, or your father should be here and he isn't.
And I think it's really important, I'm just going to say it one more time, is to break the rules and don't do as you're told. Do what you think is morally right.
One more. We got time for one more question. Yes, sir.
A personal anecdote about, you talked about not talking about the Holocaust. My brother-in-law went into the camps at 13. He was a Holocaust survivor. He died about a year ago. He never said a word for about 40 years. Finally, he wrote a book, and I asked him, Andy, why didn't you say anything? He said, when I came out of the camps and came to America, I did say something at first, and my landlady said, well, we had it tough here, too. We had sugar rationing. So, and the other point I want to make, and it's pretty pessimistic, it's not a question of education. A lot of evil people are very, very educated. Martin Heidegger was the greatest philosopher of his age, was a Nazi. There are a lot of, it's not just a question of education. Everybody knows that black slavery took place, and still there are a lot of people are anti-black. So I'm very pessimistic about the whole idea of educating. Thank you.
Well, I think, the one thing that we have to have, and that's what Anne Frank was saying, is, she said, I don't know the quote exactly, but, I still have hope that people are good. And I think we still have to have hope that people are good. Only some of them aren't.
We have to have hope, and exactly what Ella said, we have to be willing to break the rules and not let them take our power. We have to believe in our own power, our individual power and our collective power, and not cede that power, that personal power, that collective power. And together we can march forward, we can do this. You guys, I want to thank you for, again, showing up with your presence, with your voices, with having this conversation together. And Alice Hoffman, thank you for bringing her
Sara,
to life.
Thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Thank you.